Welcome to Cedar Rock Gardens. My name is Tucker Smith. Cedar Rock Gardens was formed about 10 years ago. It's an organic seedling nursery and vegetable farm. Today we are going to be going over vegetable seedling production, both in the ground and in containers for the home gardener or for the potential future farmer. We are doing this lecture today through Gloucester SaLT. Gloucester SaLT stands for Gloucester Sea and Land Together.
Anything that we can help teach skills to be self-sufficient off local food that we have an abundant source of from the sea and land here, that's what we're all about.
One thing that's important when using a seeder and also hand seeding outside is that you have a nice surface to seed into. It's all about kind of that particle size. When you lay out your seeds, you want the soil to be roughly pretty fine so that there's good soil to seed contact. We started with this seeder here. This is an earthway seeder. This is your general push seeder. One of these seeders I would say is really nice if you're doing a lot of greens, if you wanted to cover crop a large area of your garden. They can be really handy in that. What I would do to prep this bed is quickly I would get rid of any debris, especially if I'm pushing a seeder or if I am thinking that I want to weed it really easy with a hoe. Then I'm going to take and spread, usually at the base of our fertility plan is compost. And so I would go ahead and spread my compost on. Then I would lightly shake out some bagged fertilizer. In this case, I'm using Neptune's crab shell, which is a great source of nitrogen and an all-around fertilizer. So I have my compost down. Then I have my bagged fertilizer, whatever amendments. And then I'm going to slowly just fork the soil. This is going to loosen that soil. Since I put my amendments on first, every time I crack the soil, all that fertilizer and compost is going to go down into those holes. So then I don't need to do any deep tillage on that. I want to make sure that it's relatively smooth so that my seed goes in smoothly so it comes up smooth. I don't want to be wasting any seed. I like to seed in straight rows so that it makes weeding really easy. And I have my rake here and some cut up PEX pipe from plumbing. And then I can just drag this. Oh, one fell off, it's all right. And I can drag it right through and then it will mark my rows. And that way I know my spacing in between. So most of the time I would take a handful of the seed and then I would sprinkle it down this trough here. Your seed rate, this is, say I'm doing arugula. In my experience, that density is in relation to how big you want the crop. Is something to consider when you're seeding. As those plants get big, you know, you can have a kale plant up this big is your general spacing. And I would spread my seed right down this trough like this here. Then I take my hand and I gently cover that seed. I make like a little cup with my hand and I'll bring that in. And then I can firm it up by just tapping it right down. This firming is real important because when you water, that can wash out the seed. And also you want that good soil contact. When we are using these seeders on long rows, we'll find that we'll actually walk right on that seed, and where our footprints are, because it has the best soil contact, those will actually germinate first. And just to demonstrate this seeder here, you can adjust your depth with this shoe here. And so this is what I would do with my finger, right? And as this goes through the soil, it makes the trough. Then this little chain covers it over, and then this back wheel firms it onto the ground, right? If I was going to be seeding multiple plants into this area, I really prefer to use the tags to write the name of the plant that I'm planting on, planting down, as well as the date. And the date is really important. Say you come back in 3 weeks and nothing has sprouted, then usually you know something is wrong. I would sprinkle maybe 2 to 3 seeds, sprinkle those right into the hole. Again, cover it over, firm it down, and then I would put my plant tag right next to it. And plant tags are always important if other people come in your garden, but also you're going to be competing with weeds. And so if you have nice straight rows that are kind of marked, you can weed sometimes before those plants come up. This is sunshine. You got to worry about cat blight in your garden sometimes. So once I've seeded my crop here, there's a couple of tools here in the Northeast, especially you guys could go out next week, start seeding arugula, cilantro, dill, peas, right into your garden. I'm going to spread this, plant my seed in here, and then I would create a little structure like this over my plants, right? And this is a fabric here. It's called Rime or Agrabon or floating white row cover. This fabric here is going to double your growth. It's going to double your germination rate. It's pretty darn cheap and it's reusable. And essentially what this does is it will let through usually 75 to 85% of the sunlight, but it traps that heat, and then it traps in that ground heat overnight. So if you're able to use a couple of hoops like this, and these can go wide or they can go narrow. Sometimes I'll put them crooked if I have a real thin bed. That'll keep this fabric up off my plant. And then I will weigh it down with a bag on the corners or a rock. I generally try not to use soil to weigh this fabric down. You can use soil if you're in a pinch, but sometimes that soil will have weed seed in it and then it will start growing through the fabric and then it deteriorates it pretty fast. I usually just have a pallet full of these bags lying around, and we'll just cover it in a bag, and that will keep it up off the plant. This can also be used as a physical barrier for cats or rabbits or woodchucks. This is called, there's 2 trade names, which is Rime and Agrabon. And then if I went to a store, I would ask if they have any floating white row cover. And then usually after I seed a crop, I will water it right away. As you can see in this case here, I have a sprinkler system like already in place. And I know where my water's coming from. A lot of you at home would just have a hose or a watering can. That's another important reason with firming that seed bed after you plant, is so you don't get any erosion. We're gonna dump soil in the tray. And this soil here is pretty darn moist. You can spread it out. It's nice to have a bench top like this because it is messy, or it's dirty. You don't want to make sure there isn't any like large debris. If you pick up some other kind of potting mix in it, you want it pretty darn fine here. And you see how I've done that? I try and like smooth it over. If this soil here doesn't have a lot of fertilizer charge in it, we're just trying to germinate that seed and we're not growing it out to a large plant. If you have too much fertilizer in your soil and a lot of nitrogen, sometimes your plants can look like that. Now this is caused by too much heat and not enough light. This stretching. See how that's long stem there? So this is a brassica. It likes colder weather and it stayed up in that prop house a little too long. So it's stretched like that, and you can see it like it's flimsy. You can kind of brush it down. You can brush them like this, and that would actually strengthen those stems up. and they'll start developing, a stronger cell structure. But then I'll just take my fingers and I'll create a little tiny divot hole. So if I accidentally have some divot holes too deep, I can cave it in by giving it a little tap, or I can just take a little bit of extra dirt and spread it over. Another way to do this in a more uniform is to use the back side of whatever tray you're using, and you can just push down like that. All right. And I would take these in my hand and just seed out one at a time like that. And I kind of move them back and forth in my hand. They make all different kinds of nozzle heads for the, for gardening. This red one is like mid-pressure, which with some seeds isn't a big deal. If you're using really like fine, small seeds, then I might recommend that you get a mister head. This is a mister wand here, and you can just get a spray bottle. I usually will get my pressure right to the side of it, right? I don't want to hit it like that, and I don't want to hit it like this and drizzle it on. And so I'll bring it off to the side and I'll adjust my pressure that way. And then I can water in one tray. And if you have really fine seeds, I would recommend pre-soaking a tray and then seeding it. If it's pre-soaked, don't push as hard because you don't really want to compact that. And then you could mist right over the top. I'll keep this moist until I start seeing the seed pop out, right? And then once it's popped out, I'm trying to make sure that the foliage of that is dry at the end of the day. Any fungal spores need like over 12 hours usually to start to develop and to dampen off. So I usually never water in the afternoon unless it's on its deathbed. It will be fine. It doesn't go through any water overnight. Then I'll water in the morning and at noontime, and that way the foliage of the plant dries out. Having fans blowing on it will also keep that foliage nice and dry. So now that I have this fully seeded here, I can put this dome over the top. This dome is going to trap in a lot of that light heat, and then I'm able to vent it and adjust how much heat it is in there while using like a little tiny thermometer and moving this back and forth so air still gets in there. But this will trap in a lot of that moisture so you don't have to keep watering it all the time, and it traps in a little bit more of that light heat. Usually plants will stretch when they have a lot of heat but they don't have a lot of light. It's a signal to that plant that there's plenty of heat to grow. It just needs to find the light. This had too much heat as opposed to not enough light. So if you're able to bottom water and take this tray and just put it in a thing of water, that's really good for not spreading foliar diseases among the plant. So you've germinated your seed, you've gotten to this point. What the heck do I do now? These all have holes in the bottom. Usually I'll just kind of put this on its side, and you could take a screwdriver, you could take a pencil, and you can run it right through the bottom, and it kind of pushes that plant out from the base, and I can slowly pull it, and that way I'm able to get more of the plant. Now you want to transplant these plants, right before they start looking ugly. And if they get any yellowing on them of the lower leaves, they're running out of nutrients. That's usually nitrogen. If they're getting any discoloration, that can be a nutrient issue. And so I want to transplant them before that. Or I will, once they start to fill out their root ball, and a little bit more light. These haven't quite done it, but we've all bought plants where it's like completely encased. And once those roots start curling at the bottom, right, they're going backwards. And so we try and transplant them right before they curl. It's not a big deal to usually do it after, unless you're doing something with that taproot, which that could be an issue. You can make a little dibble board like this. Something like this you can make with some screws at home. And all this does is you jam it in the bottom and you see they all pop up. And then I can take these plants real gently and I'll lay them on the surface here. I'll tickle the root a little bit, just like you would if you were transplanting it outside. You want to make sure that those aren't curled when you go to transplant it. Then I have a little hole in the tray, and I have this in my left hand. I pull back and I gently place it right after my finger comes out. I kind of slide it down the finger, and now it has a lot more space to grow out. It's foliage. You know, it can harvest more light, as well as a lot more root space down below. It's a little different when you go from these smaller containers to larger. It all depends on how big you want that plant. You know, here in the north, we have a short growing season. So the bigger you can get it before you transplant it, usually the more harvest you can get off of it before it freezes again. So then we're going to grow these out. There's a technique called like hardening your plant off. So what we do is we move them from a heated greenhouse into an unheated greenhouse. We roll up the sides so they're really exposed to that wind during the day, and then we can shut them at night. You can see these were seeded about 10 days ago, and so I've been able to heat them up in this greenhouse and keep them around 80 degrees during the day when we have light, and then I'll open it up so it can breathe. And then at night, it's dropping down pretty much, 2 or 3, maybe 5 degrees above what's outside. And so if I get down, that gets me down to like 25 degrees outside, might be 30 in here. And then once I start getting to that temp, I'll use that row cover that I pointed out again, and I'll cover over these greens. And then I keep it like that, and then I just stretch it over at night, and I'd throw bags on it if it was exposed to wind. It's not exposed to wind in here, so I'm able just to gently cover these over. What you can do on a home scale, you're going to just take this, you can put it outside on a nice day like today, and then you just bring it in at night, and it's gotten exposed to the elements out there, but it hasn't gotten those freezing, killing temperatures. You can add nutrients. But by spreading it on the top and lightly getting it into here like a bagged fertilizer, or you can dissolve a fertilizer in some water and then you can water it in. And those are great ways to do it. Neptune's makes some great water-soluble fertilizers.